Hi everyone, welcome to this next tutorial in my Lightroom series. Today we're going to look at the lens corrections panel. I've really struggled with this one. It's been difficult to get hold of a picture to demonstrate the problem with. My Fuji camera actually corrects the raw file in camera before it exports it. But I've managed to find this picture shot with a Canon, full frame Canon, and an L series lens, which just goes to show that even with like real quality lenses, cameras and that, you still see these problems. So what are these problems? The first one we're going to look at is chromatic aberration. If I just zoom in over on this chimney here, you'll see this purple and this green fringing, which is caused by the light spectrum not all focusing on the sensor at the same time. As it gets towards the edges of the lenses, especially the distortion in the lens causes the different wavelengths to hit the sensor at different time, and you get this colour abnormality. The next problem we're going to look at is distortion. And if I just switch this on, we'll talk about this more in detail in a minute. But I can basically pull this slider now, and you can see this, what they call pincushion barrel distortion effect that you get. This simply happens because the lens is effectively curved on the front, so you get that different magnification factor. And lastly here, we look at vignetting, which is just the darkening of the edges of your picture. Be all number of factors, quality of the lens, the aperture you're shooting at, all sorts of things cause the light to drop off towards the edges of the pictures. We won't see it too much here, but you might just notice the darkening and the lightening of the edges of the pictures. We can adjust that manually if we need to. Just reset both of these for a minute. So you've noticed when I checked this enable profile corrections, this panel was enabled. And what this actually has in it is information about different cameras and different lens types. And we can automatically apply corrections with effectively a database of known information about the lenses. I mentioned earlier my Fuji camera corrected it before it came into Lightroom, and what I actually get up here is a little information box that says the camera's already applied any adjustments, and it doesn't actually give me any options in here at all, which is why I was saying I had to find a different picture. But you can see that a large range of cameras and lenses are available, and what it will do is automatically apply corrections to some of the problems we're looking at, like distortion and vignetting. We can see those corrections being applied if I just toggle this off and back on. You notice just how it adjusts the picture there, and it's actually straightening up, if you like, a lot of these edges. If you looked at a picture, you might not even notice the barrel distortion on it, and it's not until you actually look at it and flick between the two versions that you possibly even see it. But it is there on most lenses, so you may as well turn this correction on if it's available. We're looking at barrel distortion here with this wide angle lens, or at least it's at a wide angle 24mm, where it's convexed and the edges of the picture bend out. You can also get pincushion distortion, which is the opposite. It's concave, the edges of the picture will bend in, and that's where you're using telephoto lenses. Let's now have a look at chromatic aberration, and if we zoom back in again on this chimney that we looked at earlier, what I can do is I can switch it on using the profile information and get Lightroom to try and adjust it automatically. And if I check that, you should see down the edges now we've lost a lot of that fringing that we had. Still there, still a bit of it, and you notice it more on these branches here. But if I turn that back off, you'll see just how much worse it is. So even just using the automatic functions, we can usually clean up our picture quite a lot. I'm going to flick both these options off so we can pop over to the manual panel and just have a look at that. Firstly, we've got our distortion option, so we can adjust our distortion as we looked at earlier. I'll just reset that. We've got this constrained crop on, so when I do adjust it, you'll notice where we've got the white edges of the picture now where it's been bent in too much. If I let go, it automatically crops so that we get rid of that. Just reset that just so you can see it. So that's what constrained crop does. Jump past defringe for just a minute. Just the other easy one, vignetting. Vignetting is a real funny one because quite often, especially as a portrait photographer, I actually put vignetting into the picture to darken the edges down deliberately. So it's always a bit of a weird one, but you've got that option in here of adjusting that vignette problem if you see it. So let's come back to defringe, possibly one of the more complicated options you can see, and we'll zoom back in on our little bit of chimney so we can see what's going on here. And it basically gives us the ability to manually adjust for this chromatic aberration. And if I just turn the purple amount up, you should see we've kind of lost it down there. We've almost gone green to a certain extent. And likewise, I can adjust the green fringing down this side just with the amount slider. Now, as I've done that, you probably notice it hasn't actually made a lot of difference. We can still see it down here. But what I can do is adjust the range of colours in that spectrum area to try and compensate for it. And that's done with these sliders here. So I can perhaps pull them out a little bit. You'll notice this is actually slightly turquoise. And if I just take up this slider to include that kind of colour range, that's when I actually get rid of the fringing. So you can do that on both channels as well. I'll bring back purple. You can get some rather strange effects, to be honest, if you play around with it. You'll notice if I grab in the middle, I can adjust both sliders simultaneously, and I can just play around and remove that fringing manually. So that's what these sliders are doing. We do have one other option in here, and if I just reset everything here back to as it was, and we've got our chromatic aberration back, you'll notice I've got this little pipette tool. If I click on that, I can actually sample areas and try and remove the fringing. And there you go. But I've had some strange effects with it, I've got to be honest. I don't always find it that much better, which is why I think understanding how these sliders work can help you remove that chromatic aberration a lot better than using some of the automatic functions. If we just pop back to profile option again, I like to try and cover all of the things that appear in these boxes. So you may notice this setup, and what does that allow us to do? Well, if we have played around and created our own manual corrections, that sort of thing, one thing we can do is save it as a new lens profile, and then that becomes available to us to use like any of the already available default ones. And what do these options mean? Auto basically means that Lightroom has found a profile that matches the information it's found in the EXIF data, and it's automatically applied one of those profiles for us. Default does a very similar sort of thing, but if it can't find a profile, you can select one manually, and then you can actually save that as the default for that camera / lens combination. So the next time you use that camera and lens, it will be the default profile that's applied. And lastly, custom is if we manually select a different profile or adjust these sliders. If I just adjust the distortion, for example, you'll see it switch to custom, and it will stay like that unless we choose to save it as our own preset. So that's the panel. Just a couple of things to wrap up with. If I come back out, once we've set this, we can actually save it as a preset if we want to. You'll notice the option under lens corrections to save as a preset. Do lens correction, for example, and we can do that. Select all of the changes that we've made, and I can create that. So now under my user presets, I've got lens correction, and that can be handy because if we come back to our library module and we were to do an import, for example, import to this folder, let the import dialog come up, we can actually apply develop settings during the import, and we could actually select then from our user presets lens correction, and that would actually put any corrections against all of the images as we brought them in. Whether or not you need that very much depends on what your photo shoot's been about. If you've got a mixture, you probably don't need it, but it is an option that's available for you if you want to speed up your workflow. Well, that's it for this one. I hope it's been of use to you. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd love you to join the clan, and hopefully I'll see you for the next one. Bye now.